So tonight we're going to talk about exit strategies. So you can see we're finding a property over here on the upper left. It comes into the evaluate phase. We get it under contract, which of course those two phases need to do the calculations. We get it purchased, we get it rehabbed, and then we have our exit strategies. And of course, funding goes in all of that, and you have the back office and your team. I'm going to talk about the wholesale, the retail sale, the lease option, land contract. These are called the exit strategies, and that's where I'm going to focus. There's a number of different exit strategies depending on what you want to do with the property. In general, finding the property and then getting it under contract and I want to say disposing of it, of exiting the property, is the is the next final, kind of the final step. Now, defining exit in this case, if you're doing a rental, as it moves out of the acquisitions phase into the housing provider stage. So we've got rentals, we've got fix and flips. So that's what all the HGTV programs are all about. We've got land contracts, lease options, wholesaling, and I'll explain that in a second, and a bird dog. So the first one I want to talk about is the one that's going to get you the long-term wealth, and that is to make it into a rental. Yes, it's the one that has the tenants and toilets, or you could do joint ventures and some push off some of the work on that. It is the hardest overall to deal with. But I think it's the best and easiest for the beginners and the newbies. And I will say this is where the best stories come from. I don't want to scare anybody because most tenants, they're like, okay, so I'll pay the bill. Well, it's not a very good story. It's a terrible story. But the tenant that didn't pay their bill, that was a hoarder, oh, those make great stories. But they really aren't that common. But they make great stories. So those are the ones that you're going to hear that will scare you. And the thing that's nice about rentals is that each step stays separate. Okay, you kind of want to overlap them, but you can do each step one step at a time. So you find a house, figure out how much you need to offer, make the offer, find the funding, get it purchase it, do the rehab, and then get it rented. Notice there's none of those steps have to be done at the same time. Whereas some of the other solutions, you do have to do stuff in parallel. So the pros of the rental is that this is where you're going to build your long-term wealth. If you have a property that's cash flowing a couple $100 a month, it's paying for itself. You're not putting more money into it. And when you get to the point where the mortgage is paid off, there's a whole discussion about whether you want to do that or not, but that's a different date. When you get to the point where the mortgage is paid off, it jumps up quite a bit. Okay, one house isn't going to make you rich, but one stock isn't going to make you rich either. So you look at multiple properties. A lot of people think they have to have 100 properties. I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to say that you can do 20 or 30 properties depending on what neighborhood you're in. The goal is, you're buying and fixing it up. You're not going to fix it up as well as you would if you're doing a fix and flip. I'll tell you what a fix and flip is in a minute. You're going to do it kind of on the cheap. You're putting a renter in. Renters are, they need to have a place that kind of looks nice, that's functional, that's safe. The whole process is that if in a normal market, you're not really competing with the homeowners, and you're going to be building your skills and your experience. The downside is each property is going to have a small monthly cash flow. You're going to have to manage the tenants and toilets. We've all heard the stories. You have to deal with maintenance. You know, the hot water heaters don't last forever. It is a job managing the properties. In some sense, it gets easier when you have more properties, which is kind of counterintuitive. At some point, you get enough properties that you can afford to get a property manager. When you first start, I wouldn't get a property manager. I would do it myself. In fact, that's exactly what we did. So the next strategy is the fix and flip strategy. And this is the one that everybody sees on the HGTV made up stories. Most of them, there's a lot of creative display going on with those shows. And this is where, you know, they say, oh, we made $100,000. Well, if you're in an area where the properties peak out at being worth $100,000, it's hard to make $100,000 in profit. But you can buy them for way cheaper too. So in the area that I'm in, which is Northeast Ohio, in fact, most of Ohio, and some other places nearby, Indiana, you can buy properties for $25,000, $30,000, $35,000, put another 20, 30, 40,000 into them, and they're worth 100. And of course, all these numbers are going up as inflation hits. So with the exit strategy, the fix and flip exit strategy, you're going to need to find contractors. Well, you're going to do that with the rentals as well. These have to be a little better quality because you're trying to fit these such that the end buyer is going to be a homeowner. You can target rentals where you're going to sell it to another landlord, housing provider. I don't lord over anybody. And so you have to do a much better quality. You're going to have the patience on selling. So it's easy in a seller's market, which is like the market that we're in right now, 2024, 2023, 2025 is my guess. And it can be hard in a buyer's market. So 2008-ish, 2010, the crash took things from a seller's market back to a buyer's market. And a seller's market is where the seller essentially controls the pricing. In a buyer's market, there's essentially too many houses, so the buyers control the pricing. It can be a little slow in and out, but it makes good profit. It takes some time to do the rehabs. I think it's the second hardest because you have to deal with all of the same things you do with a rental, plus minus that final rental. But I think it's the second easiest for the newbies and the beginners. And the advantage of it is that, again, you can do one step at a time. It's harder in this than a rental because you have to do a better job. All right, so let's look at pros and cons. This makes big chunks of money. You know, it's not uncommon to walk away with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in these markets that have $100,000 as value. You know, if you're talking about locations like California or Phoenix or Colorado or, interestingly enough, Minnesota, which always blows my mind. East Coast, Florida, you know, the numbers, the scale on which everything is, just kind of add a zero. So you can make good money there, but it also means that you're going to have to purchase and spend more money and hold more money, and you're essentially at a larger risk. So it's on the con side. Um, the goal of the fix and flip is to buy cheap, fix it up, and then sell it, and sell it with value, because you've taken a property that, needed work, that a homeowner doesn't want to look at. If a homeowner walks into it and can smell it from the street, they're probably just going to turn around and drive away. Whereas us investors, we can look at it and go, yeah, that's the smell of money. And then once it's fixed up, now the homeowner is going to look at it and go, ooh, I want that house. I want to move into that house. Um, and it is a good mix as you start to process your grow your empire, between mixing buying rentals and doing the fix and flip, because the fix and flip can provide some funds that can then drive your rental process. And again, it also builds some skills and experiences. The downsides is that it can be a job, and once the property is sold, then that property is gone. So there's no more cash flow. There's no money from there. You need some significant temporary resources. You need funds to buy the property, to fix the property up. And you need time, because it takes time to rehab a property properly. You're gonna have to deal with contractors, same as a rental, but a little higher quality ones, because you want a better job done. You've got holding costs. And the result can go up or down depending on the market. Right now, the market seems to be, in this area, tends to be stable. But if you look at some of the markets, most of Florida, California, Phoenix, those markets are starting to fall. And so, you might buy thinking that, oh, I can sell it for $400,000. And the market's coming back and saying, oh, no, it's $300,000. Those cyclic markets that are the high appreciation markets are also the high depreciation markets, like California, Phoenix. And so as a result, it could be hard to sell. And now you've got this resource that you're holding on to. Now, one strategy is to target the fix and flip, because you're going to do a better job there, but then have as a backup strategy to do a rental. All right. So kind of splitting the difference, there are two different ways in which you can kind of split the difference between the rental and the fix and flip. And one of the strategy is a land contract. In the case of buying a property, whether it's a fix and flip or the rental, ownership is going to transfer, meaning that you will actually own the property. With the land contract, you kind of sort of sell the property ownership, but only partially. It's kind of it's clouding the title is the proper term. And so you own the property, and so your name is the one that's still on the county records that says who owns it. But the buyer, the land contract buyer, has this piece of paper that says they're potentially the owner. It makes it difficult to get things like water turned on and things like that, but those are dealable. And if you have a problem with them paying, then you have to go through a foreclosure process. You can't just evict. Evict is the easiest way to get somebody out of a house. But foreclosure, and there's some constraints on that, where you can do the eviction even on a land contract if the dollar amounts are small enough that they've put in. Ohio put some restrictions on land contracts. They do seem to be loosening up. Land contracts and lease options are managed kind of at the state level in terms of the laws. So need to check your individual state to make sure that the laws allow for the either one of those. Right now, the land contract's being watched very closely by the Ohio Real Estate Commission. Some folks were taken advantage of. And rather than dealing with the folks that were taken advantage of or that were taking the advantage, they just kind of did a blanket. Oh, we'll shut this whole thing down. It's and you have to stay current on the laws. Belonging to any RIA that's local helps a lot because they'll know what the law changes are. It is like a lot like a rental, but the tenant thinks that they're the owner. They think that they're buying it, which can mean that if there's a problem with the property, that they'll fix it. At least that's the theory. Either that or they don't understand being an owner and let things go. But that's real estate. Pros and cons. Most people have heard of land contract, and they assume that's pretty much the only way that the kind of low end properties can be purchased if you don't have the ability to go to a bank. The buyers do have a lot of protection. The buyers do think it is their own property, so they'll take better care of it. Some states regulate it pretty tight, and you may need to do a foreclosure instead of a simple eviction. The ownership is clouded, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. So it's watched closely by the state regulators. And that's true in different ways in every different state. A lease option. So what a lease option is two documents. One is a standard rental agreement. That's the lease part of it. So people are actually renting the property. But they have a second document that says that they're allowed to execute this option agreement, which allows them to purchase the property within some time period, usually 3 years, for such and such a price. And you can do some calculations and say, we'll have an appraiser appraise the price and that, yada, yada, yada. So there's a lot of variables there. And the option agreement basically says that the buyer is allowed to purchase the property at such and such a price, these conditions, up through 3 years. 3 years is chosen strategically. And if they fail to make the payments, then the option agreement goes null and void. So now they're just a rental and you can do the eviction. You may have some modifications to the rental agreement to say that the tenant buyer is responsible for all repairs. Whether they do the repairs or not is kind of whether they do the repairs or not. That's a good thing, bad thing. And the option agreement is structured so that they have the option of exercising the agreement at their choice with some limitations. Whereas you're committed to, you made a sale, it's kind of sort of a sale, an option sale that says, okay, we agreed to, pricing the property at $100,000, whatever number. And if the market just went sky high and in 3 years now it's worth $200,000, too bad, you're going to sell it at 100. So the advantages, typically you can get a higher purchase price because a lot of the people that would choose both a land contract and lease option probably can't qualify for a bank loan initially. The whole idea behind these is that it gives them time to create a much better credit portfolio maybe they had some medical issues or whatever, put them in a bad position, but then the lease option and land contract give them time to repair their credit. And then, or with some of them, it's the only way that they can buy. So as far as us as landlords are concerned, excuse me, housing providers, the owner of the property, ownership does not transfer. The payments to us from a tax perspective, from an income perspective, look like rent. The option agreement is kind of like it's not a down payment because it's an option fee. You're buying a piece of paper for a fixed fee. What we do is we actually, in the rental agreement, actually require a security deposit, as well as the option agreement has a purchase price, so that if we get into court and the court says, oh, well, your option agreement purchase price or that money that to buy the option is, I'll treat it as a security deposit. Well, and we can counter that with saying, no, we have a security deposit. This was a non-refundable option fee. And as far as I know, nobody's challenged that. If there's no security deposit, they might challenge it and say, well, that fee for the option agreement was in fact a security deposit. And so now it becomes refundable. And the good news is the buyer thinks that they are buying the property, so they will take better care of the property. The pros to a lease option, if the buyer fails to pay, the option goes null and void. Then you can evict. So the option agreement says that all payments are current, and you can still honor the option agreement if they've missed payments, but that's your option. If they haven't paid, you can say, well, we'll just shut this down. Now it's just a rental. Oh, you're behind in your payments. We'll just evict. The option is self-terminating, meaning it's time limited. Usually you set it for 3 years with a clause in there that says it can be renewed for whatever terms you want to do at the choice, at the decision of both parties. You get better cash flow because you get upfront money, and when they finally close in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, because they can execute earlier, then you've got the money at closing because you said, well, okay, so the standard price for this property, the ARV, the after repair value, is $100,000. Well, I'll do a lease option at 110, 120. So you can get more money that way. You can't, like I said, you can renew. And if the buyer chooses not to exercise the option, you can evict and do it all over again. May have to do some rehab to bring it up to quality. Negatives, you have to qualify the buyer as both a renter and as a buyer, because they may be in a financial position where they'll never be able to buy it. If they don't have a good enough track record with their purchases and their spending habits, they might not be a good buyer. A lot of times that also means they're not a good renter. Many simply don't qualify because of those types of things. We look, and a lot of times it's because they don't qualify as a renter either. If they don't, if they've faulted on their cell phone bill or their cable TV bill, there's probably a good chance that they're going to default on the rent too. And many of them don't have that non-refundable option fee. We try to go for a 10%, so effectively a down payment, and minimum $2,000. Sometimes we'll drop from 10%, say it's $100,000 house, which should be $10,000. We'll let them get in at 5,000. And the good and bad side of it is if that buyer does actually execute, does actually choose to buy the property, you get a chunk of money, but you lose the cash flow. So another strategy, which is the gurus seem to think this one is like really, really good, mostly because it's easy to teach. I think it's terrible, but there are good reasons to do it. Is wholesaling. And so the fundamental structure of a pure wholesale deal is you get the property under contract and then you sell the contract. So all your marketing says, I have a contract to purchase a house, and for the assignment of contract, which is a second deal. So I go to Gail and she has a house, and so I get it under contract as if I'm going to buy it. Then I go to Goodwin, and Goodwin is interested in the property. So we get a piece of paper called an assignment of contract, and the words change depending on which state you're in, but the concepts are pretty much the same. And then so Goodwin then says, okay, fine, I'll buy that property. So I'm going to get it under contract, say with Gail for $30,000. I go to Goodwin and say, okay, well, you can buy this option or this assignment for 35,000, which includes the purchase price. So what ends up happening is Goodwin spends 35,000, 5,000 of that goes to me, and then Goodwin then goes to the actual close, and he's the one that purchased the property. So in all of that, I'm not in the chain of title. Unless you're in this state, this state, this state, this state. So you really need to check with your local REIA groups, with the lawyers, et cetera, of what's allowed to be done in your particular state. So, for example, in Illinois, wholesalers must be realtors, which I think is really silly, but that's the law. So make sure that you understand what the laws are associated with it. So essentially, there are two contracts. If it can be done, the two contracts. The first contract is the purchase agreement, and it's an ordinary purchase agreement. My intent is that I'm going to purchase it, and that is my backup intent if I can't assign it. And it should say, in some states, it must say, in Ohio, it does not require that you have to say it, is that it's Scott Kruzmark and or as assigns. And that allows the legalities to be completely above board. That means that the seller is going to know that Scott Kruzmark may in fact not be the actual buyer, but that Goodwin could end up, of course, Goodwin's never mentioned in any of this because I haven't found him yet. And so we're going to transfer the process that way. There are conditions under which that process can't occur directly. So you do what's called a double close, where I get it under contract. I actually close the property and then 5 minutes later sell it to Goodwin. So there are two transactions, which means that there's a lot of the fees are doubled because you have transfer taxes because it's been transferred twice. But a lot of the other fees like title search, title insurance go way down because they won't go down below a single transfer, but that because I owned it for 5 minutes, there was unlikely to be any deed changes in that time period. So the title search doesn't need to be done again a second time. It is a quick in and out. The hardest part with a wholesaler is that the profits are small. You know, with a fix and flip, you might be earning $30,000, whereas with a wholesale deal, it might be $2,000 to $5,000. So to make any money, you got to be doing a lot of wholesaling. And of course, in a market where it's hard to find a property at all, then, you know, finding 20, 30 properties in every single month to be able to get a decent income, that can be a bit challenging. I find that because the fact that you have to find both a buyer and a seller and coordinate this double transaction, that it's harder for beginners to be able to bring all the various different pieces together simultaneously. Now, if you belong to a RIA and or a buying group of some kind, and you're feeding that group, then yeah, sure, wholesaling makes a lot of sense because you've got half the transaction already arranged. All you have to do is find the properties. Make sure that your intent is to close. Part of the state of Ohio and other states are looking at wholesalers with a really negative view because there are a number of folks out there that have less than sufficient ethics. There was a guy out of Connecticut that put 100 properties under contract. Of course, he put them under at too high a number and sold one of them. Well, that 99 people were unhappy. So when a contract, when you have a purchase agreement, that purchase agreement, the seller thinks the property sold. Now, not every deal goes through, even in the regular retail world through realtors. But, you know, if you have 1 in 100, yeah, there's a problem there. If you have 9 out of 10, I think you're safe. And my view is that if you can't find a wholesale buyer, well, then buy it yourself. You use that as your backup plan, because, you know, if the property is worth 100 and you can get it under contract where somebody's going to buy it for 35 and put whatever into it, well, and if you can get it for 30, because that's what you have it under contract for, that's an extra $5,000 that's yours. So it does get easier as you start to build your network. And so finding properties and finding buyers does get way simpler when you've built up your network, because, you know, you just talk to people around you. So here's a recap of some of the pros. It looks easy. It's easy to describe. You don't have to actually do any of the work. You don't have to deal with the tenants and toilets. It can be done remotely. So if you're sitting in Connecticut or in Colorado or Kansas or, you know, Cincinnati versus Northeast Ohio, you can do it remotely. You don't need much money. You're going to need some money for marketing. So it's not that you don't need any money. It is a job. And, you know, if once you've done that wholesale deal and you made your profit, then you're done with that deal. There's no further income. You need to process a large number of houses per month to make any profit and be able to live on it, which of course means a lot of work. It's small profit, depending on the area, anywhere from 2,000 to 30,000 to, I've seen deals that were wholesale deals up to 50, very uncommon. And you still have to estimate the rehab, because your whole point is that you're trying to get it under contract such that your buyer looks at the deal and says, yes, this is a good deal, it's worth it. And so you have to know how much does a roof cost, what do windows cost. You can do some estimating, don't do too much. Ethics, getting it under contract, your intent is to get it under is that it's closed one way or the other. Have a plan A and plan B. You should do that anyway in real estate. There are some legal issues. This is one of those that's kind of under scrutiny and depends on the state. You must get it under contract. You cannot sell a property that you do not have under contract. You cannot even market a property, because now you've turned from being a wholesaler to representing the seller, and that's reserved. That fiduciary responsibility is reserved for the realtors. You don't want to be a representative. You want to be a partner in the transaction. And it's real easy to estimate the repairs if you can walk through. But if you're sitting in California or Colorado or wherever, estimating repairs can be a bit of a challenge. You can have somebody take the camera and walk through, but they're not going to see everything. They're not going to be able to have the smell-o-vision process. They're not going to be able to tell you whether the floors are squishy. And if the seller is the one running the camera, he might accidentally, or she might accidentally skip the corner that's falling in. And it is possible, doesn't happen too often, but it does happen, where the buyer does go around you. They now know where the house is, they know who the seller is, and they just simply skip you and cut you out of the process. Not ethical, not legal, but that hasn't stopped a lot of people. All right. The final strategy I'm going to talk about is a bird dog. And this is where you go talk to your UPS driver, your mailman, somebody who is wandering around that can see a lot of houses. Bird dogs can get into driving for dollars. Their role in life is to find the properties that look like they're vacant and feed you that information. So what you want to do is to have them take, obviously the address of the property and anything that they can determine about the property, and take at least 3 pictures, more is better. You want one straight on from the front and one from each of the sides, so that you get a picture of the roof and the 2 sides. If you can get a picture of the back, that's great. It's just a starting point because you can't see inside. But at least, it gets some basic information for you to be able to contact the owner and say, hey, I saw this property appears to be vacant. Would you consider selling it? And then see what happens. And you don't have to be a commissioned salesman. Well, be careful that you don't become a commission salesman. That's what the comment is. So if I only pay for the properties that I buy, not all the properties that the bird dog. So as an investor, I have a couple of people that feed me deals that are these, mailman, and he gives me a list. If I pay him for everything, I'm not going to pay him much, $20, $50 per lead, I'm good. But if I only pay him for the deals, the ones that come through and where I'm going to make some money off of it, now he's become a commission salesperson. And now you've turned over to the other side. Now, does that happen? Does that happen a lot? Absolutely. But I'm not recommending that. That's a legality issue. All right. So these are the six that I talked about. Um, Rentals, that's the long-term wealth. The fix and flips, that's short-term chunks of change. That's also, you're typically selling to a retail buyer. Might be a landlord that you're selling to, but most likely they're going to be able to find the properties themselves. You can sell it as a land contract. It's also called an installment sale. You can do a lease option. You can do wholesaling, or you can do bird dog. You can see that how this all fits together. So we talked about finding a property, getting it, estimating how much you're going to offer, getting it under contract. Nothing happens until it's under contract except for the bird dog. Getting it purchased, getting it rehabbed, and then disposing of it, if you consider a rental disposal. You're going to need money, and you're going to need some office and back office, and you're going to need team. If you're interested in getting involved with my training, there's a QR code